Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. This week, the week ending the 2nd of November 1924, the big news is that Stanley Baldwin's Conservative/Unionist Party has won Wednesday's general election in a landslide, winning 403 seats, giving it a 208 majority. Take that, Keir Starmer, Tony Blair, Clement Attlee, Margaret Thatcher and Henry Campbell Bannerman. Its only rival for the crown of biggest majority of the 20th century is the 1918 election, but the government was a Conservative/Lloyd George Liberal coalition. The Labour Party lost 42 seats, despite increasing its vote from 4.3 million to 5.5 million. The election was a disaster for the Liberals. Their vote fell from 4.2 million to 2.9 million, and their number of seats from 147 to 36, with even Herbert Asquith, their co-leader, losing his seat. This was the moment the Liberal Party ceased to be an election-winning party. Their collapse is remarkable, although not so remarkable that the Times deemed it worthy of much comment. In Ireland, the Unionists won in Fermanagh and Tyrone. I've been banging on about this because it's a weird story. This was a nationalist seat. Because it was expected that the Boundary Commission would recommend that the area be transferred to the Irish Free State. But Eamon de Valera put up candidates, and the nationalists withdrew theirs. Now you might think that the Irish would vote for de Valera in order to join with a Free State, but they didn't. While nationalists would normally get about 40,000 votes, de Valera's candidates got less than 10,000. Meanwhile, the Unionist vote went up. Why? The only conclusion I can draw is that a substantial number of nationalists voted Unionist. They may be Irish, but they would rather be governed by the British. For some reason. During the campaign, de Valera himself managed to get deported from Northern Ireland, and a couple of days later, having recrossed the border, get arrested in Londonderry. Winston Churchill, for a change, actually won an election, winning at Epping. The announcement to the crowd at Trafalgar Square led, according to the Times, to the biggest cheer of the night, although they should perhaps have been cheering the then privately owned London Underground, which had put on a number of special trains so that they could get home. The election was less good for women candidates. Whereas there were 8 women MPs at dissolution, there are now only 4. The Times had to remind readers after all that excitement that the local elections were taking place on Saturday. Obviously, they were yet to decide on Thursday as election day. The election campaign this week was dominated by the fallout from the Zinoviev letter. As we left it in last week's episode, the letter, which purported to show the top Soviet communist calling for British communists to prepare for revolution, provoked, or at least appeared to provoke, a robust response from Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald. Well, this week he's having second thoughts. While senior Unionist figures are making hay saying this is what communists are like, senior Labour figures, to a man, are claiming that the letter is clearly a fake. In this they have been joined by those paragons of honesty and straight-talking, the Soviet authorities. J.R. Campbell, the man at the centre of the Workers' Weekly case, in which a communist newspaper called on servicemen to disobey orders, rather gave the game away. The second part of the manifesto, he means the Zinoviev letter, of September the 15th, told the communists to carry on the propaganda in the army and navy as if they had not been doing that. They did not require to be told by Zinoviev or McManus or Kuusinen, Zinoviev's alleged co-signatories, that it was necessary to carry on propaganda among the forces. So, the letter is fake but accurate. This really put MacDonald on the spot. After several days of silence, he ended up making the dubious claim that the issuance of his response was the result of a mix-up. Whatever the case, this made him look gullible, weak, shifty and panicky. The real question is, did it make a difference? Of course, this is unknowable. We don't know how people voted, let alone how they might have voted. There weren't even opinion polls to guide us, and even if there were, we all know how inaccurate they can be. What we can say is that the letter was a reasonable enough statement of the Soviet Union's intentions towards the United Kingdom, and that voters had every right to be aware of those intentions. In all this, you do have to feel sorry for this guy. It has been frequently stated that the surnames of many of the notorious Bolshevists of the SSSR, as they called the Soviet Union in those days, as former Russia is now called by her ravagers, are distinctly assumed ones. Whether deliberately or not, they are generally chosen, I may say stolen, from amongst those belonging to old Christian and respectable families. Apfelbaum, the notorious president of the Third International, figures, for instance, as Zinoviev, and is usually designated under this pseudonym, printed in characters to catch the eye. Since 1919 to 1920, my sons, their families, and myself, after hard trials, have enjoyed the hospitality of England, and leading a quiet and laborious life, try to earn our daily bread. But for over 4 years, my own and my family's peace has been constantly disturbed by Apfelbaum, the false Zinoviev. When travelling, our passports and visa are suspiciously and lengthily examined. On the continent, I have even been subjected to a very humiliating arrest. Our name, when given in hotels, in shops, in offices, etc., evokes unremittingly a manifest alarm. My grandchildren, those of school age, are successively shocked by close cross-examination about their presumed relationship to Zinoviev. And it's signed Alexander D. Zinoviev, member of the former Council of the Empire of Russia, etc. Elsewhere on the campaign trail, there have been reports of rowdyism in Edinburgh and Battersea. Alfred Mond, one of the few Liberals to be returned to Parliament, had this to say on the subject. It is obviously and notoriously the fact that not only in my own case, but in that of Liberal and Conservative candidates throughout the country, meetings are being wrecked by carefully organised gangs, and no human being believes that they are operating without direction or without payment. Many of these rowdies are brought from outside the areas they attack, and somebody must pay their fares and expenses, which amount in all undoubtedly to a considerable sum. Rent-a-mob. Thank goodness no politicians would think of bussing in supporters nowadays. At an election meeting in Islington, a member of the audience accused the speaker of being a divorced man and having married a divorced woman. He, the heckler, ended up in court on a charge of a breach of the 1895 Corrupt and Illegal Practices Prevention Act, which is designed to prevent people making false statements during election campaigns. Clearly in those days divorce was a matter of shame. I did look it up to see if that act was still in the books. It doesn't seem to be, but parts of it may be. But I wonder if the rules are still there. They may be, I don't know. On Thursday, the Times mentioned that the staff at Chatham Naval Dockyard had been given half a day's leave in order to vote. The implication being that if they had not been given the leave, they would not have had the chance. One wonders how many others were in a similar situation, but didn't get the leave. In other news, Francis Hodgson Burnett, author of Little Lord Fauntleroy and The Secret Garden, has died. A bomb has gone off in a train in British Columbia, killing 8 people. It would appear to be the result of a feud in a Russian émigré sect known as the Dokabors. An article on the situation in Morocco has revealed that Spanish dictator Primo de Rivera had based himself there to oversee the Rif War. It is 10 years since the outbreak of the First World War. As the weeks have passed, so have the 10-year anniversaries of the initial clashes. This week the Times has published articles on the First Battle of Ypres, which saw the end of the War of Movement, and the Battle of Coronel, which ended in a humiliating British defeat. A Lewisham headmaster found himself in court after caning a boy in error. The summons was dismissed on the payment of £5. There has been a correspondence on the subject of level crossings, or grade crossings as they are known on the other side of the Atlantic. Motorists are complaining about the delays. Some are suggesting that they be eliminated by the provision of overbridges. Another correspondent has pointed out that level crossings only exist because locals allowed them when the railways were first built. There has also been a correspondence on the subject of bread. Some say you have to mill your own wheat. Others, that it all depends on how that wheat is grown. Last week I mentioned the exhibition game of baseball played at Stamford Bridge. This has provoked a letter from Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes. What is essential is that here is a splendid game which calls for a fine eye, activity, bodily fitness, and judgment in the highest degree. This game needs no expensive levelling of a field. Its outfit is within the reach of any village club. It takes only 2 or 3 hours in the playing. It is independent of wet wickets, and the player is on his toes all the time, and not sitting on a pavilion bench while another man makes his century. A watchable bat and ball game. Not a bit of call for it. The Soviet Union is currently governed by a triumvirate consisting of that guy Zinoviev, another guy called Kamenev, and another guy called Stalin. Mr. Stalin doesn't get an awful lot of coverage, so when he does we should probably listen. This week he was talking about rural affairs. Instead of infecting the entire countryside with communism, they had, Stalin said, created among the peasantry a bitter hatred of the ruling authorities and the town workers, which jeopardized the Soviet government's very existence, and, unless a radical change were achieved, might produce general peasant risings throughout Russia. Stalin bluntly contradicted the official assurances that the Georgian Rising was merely a counter-revolutionary plot conducted by former nobles and intellectuals, and having no support among the masses. It was, he declared, nothing of the kind. The insurgents included masses of peasants in various parts of Georgia. Now you might think that Stalin here is siding with the peasants, but, spoiler alert, you would be wrong. In 1911, Winston Churchill was appointed First Lord of the Admiralty, or the political head of the Navy. In Grad Admiral Tirpitz's memoirs, he reported on a conversation with the German naval attaché in London. There is no doubt that the change is very unpopular among naval officers. Your occasional reminder that Churchill's record in office before he became Prime Minister was extremely patchy, as indeed it was after he became Prime Minister. In the 21st of September episode, I mentioned Neville Chamberlain's improbable mauling of Oswald Mosley. I hadn't realised they were standing against one another for the Birmingham Ladywood constituency, which would explain Chamberlain's enthusiasm for the task. This week the Times had this to say about his then Labour opponent. Mr. Mosley has charged into the fray with an almost reckless abandon and with oratorical and calculated offensiveness. Chamberlain, by the way, won by 77 votes. I did wonder if Chamberlain took revenge on Mosley, who by that time was a fascist, by interning him in the Second World War. But he didn't. Interning Mosley was one of Churchill's doings, one of his very first as Prime Minister. There was a time when the editorial in the Times was known as the Thunderer. I have to say I have seen little evidence of that over the years. Most Times editorials are exceeded in their vapidity only by their verbosity. The editorial printed on Monday, entitled The Choice, was a very different kettle of fish. At next Wednesday's polling booths, two utterly incompatible systems of social, economic, industrial, and even political life will confront each other. One has grown with the industrial and political development of this nation for 250 years. No one pretends that it is perfect, or anything like perfect. It has produced evil as well as good. But there are two plain things to be said in its favour. It has shown itself capable of perpetual adjustment, improvement, and reform. It has again and again made England and the British Empire the envy and admiration of the world. That is the system against which the country is asked to inaugurate a constitutional rebellion on Wednesday. Not sure about the quotes around constitutional rebellion. I can't recall anyone actually using the phrase. It goes on. What is to be put in its place? A system which, wherever it has been tried, under its most amiable or its most truculent form, has been a complete and irretrievable failure. The record of socialism is one of stagnant or moribund trade, of industrial strife and political incompetence. And whenever it has appeared in the extreme shape of communism, as in Russia today, such terms as these are far too mild to describe the disastrous results. This seems to imply that socialism has appeared elsewhere other than Russia. Yes, there was a brief communist takeover in Hungary, but I don't think you can draw any conclusions from that. I can only imagine that the editorial is referring to state-run enterprises. It goes on. Russia is a ruin, and if the Bolshevists gave place tomorrow to the best government in the world, it would take many years to rebuild what has been destroyed. Spoiler alert, they did not get the best government in the world in 1991. Russia will recover someday. I suppose the recovered Russia is the one we are dealing with in real life. Anyway, that's all for this week. At this point, I believe I'm supposed to say something about liking and subscribing, if you're logged in, that is. In the meantime, I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.